1. We're checking out this 1971 Chevy Custom 20 that just popped up on Craigslist for $20,000. Let me tell you, these C20s are getting harder to find, especially with the big block 396 under the hood. This truck's running the bulletproof TH400 automatic transmission, which is basically the gold standard for handling big power from that era. And check this out. It's got a Dana 60 rear end, which is seriously tough and perfect for this setup. The seller's got it rolling on centerline wheels with fresh rubber all around, which definitely gives it that classic muscle truck look. The clean title is always good news, meaning no hidden history to worry about. While the seller's description is pretty brief, the combo of the 396/TH400/Dana 60 is a solid powertrain setup that these trucks were known for. Now, I've got to be straight with you. We don't have much info about the body condition, interior state, or how well it runs, so you definitely want to check those out in person. These old Chevys can be prone to rust, especially in the cab corners and bed, so that's something to look out for. At $20K, you're in the ballpark for a clean example, but you'll want to inspect everything thoroughly before pulling the trigger. 2. We're looking at a pretty interesting find, a 1974 Chevy K20 Custom Deluxe that's popped up for $9,000. Let me be completely honest with you about this one. This is a project truck, and the seller's upfront about that, which I appreciate. The good news first, it's got the robust 350 V8 with 4-bolt mains, which is a solid foundation for any build. The 4x4 setup with worn hubs is a big plus, and having dual fuel tanks is always convenient. With 75,209 original miles, the odometer reading is surprisingly low for a 74, if accurate. Now let's talk reality. This truck's been sitting for years, and while it ran great when parked, we all know how that story usually goes. The paint is sun-damaged, which isn't surprising for these old workhorses. It's currently sitting on 36-inch tires, which the seller notes are smaller than what it had before, suggesting it's got a lift kit. At $9,000 OBO, you're buying potential here. It's got all the right ingredients: 3/4 ton, 4x4, long bed, and the reliable 350 auto combo. But let's be real, you're looking at some serious work to get this beast back on the road. You'll likely need to address fuel system issues, brakes, seals, and probably a good bit of mechanical refreshing after its extended nap. 3. We're checking out a sweet find, a 1979 Ford Bronco that's listed for $15,000. Let me tell you, first-gen Broncos are hot right now, but this is a full-size second-gen, and it's got some really interesting features worth talking about. The seller's got this Bronco equipped with the 351 modified engine, which is a fantastic power plant for these rigs. If you know your Ford engines, you know the 351M has plenty of torque for off-road fun. With only 38,000 miles showing on the odometer, though you'll want to verify that, this could explain why it's in such claimed excellent condition. What's really catching my attention here is the seller's claim of no rust and a clean body. For a '79 Bronco, that's pretty significant. These trucks were notorious for rust issues, especially around the wheel wells and rocker panels. The brown paint gives it that classic late '70s vibe, and paired with the 4x4 capability, it's got that perfect vintage off-roader look. At $15,000, you're in the ballpark for a clean second-gen Bronco. These trucks have been climbing in value, though they're still more affordable than their first-gen cousins. The automatic transmission and 4x4 setup make it a practical classic you can actually use. Just remember, even with a clean example like this, you'll want to check the usual Bronco trouble spots: the rear liftgate, floor pans, and make sure that 4x4 system engages smoothly. If everything checks out as described, this could be a solid buy for someone looking for a classic Bronco that's ready to hit the trails or cruise the streets. 4. We're looking at a pretty interesting 1967 Chevy C10 listed for $8,750, and I've got to be straight with you about this one. This truck's got some real potential, and there are some genuine positives we need to talk about. First off, being an Arizona truck is a huge plus. We're talking about a legitimately rust-free body with original panels, which is getting harder to find these days. The seller's claiming it's super solid, and in the Southwest, that's usually no exaggeration. It's running the inline 6 with an automatic transmission, and here's something cool. It's got the rare power steering option, which makes these old trucks much more enjoyable to drive around town. Now let's be real about what you're getting into. The truck's been sitting for years, though the seller's already tackled some important maintenance items. They've installed new brakes, hub bearings, battery, carburetor, and brake cylinders. That's a good start, but here's the honest truth. The seller straight up says it needs TLC to make road-worthy. That means you're not driving this home without some additional work. With 125,000 miles on the clock and 30 years with the previous owner, this C10's got stories to tell. The price at $8,750, or $7,950 if you bring your own wheels, is actually pretty fair in today's market for a solid rust-free 67, especially with the mechanical work already done. Just remember, you'll need to budget for whatever additional work it needs to get roadworthy. 5. We're checking out something really special. A 1967 Chevy El Camino that's listed for $25,900. Let me tell you, this isn't your average El Camino. This is a seriously built machine that deserves our attention. Let's dive into what makes this one stand out. Under the hood, you're getting a 383 stroker motor, which is basically a beefed-up small block Chevy that's known for making serious power while maintaining reliability. It's paired with a 700 R4 transmission. That's a smart upgrade from the original, giving you an overdrive gear for comfortable highway cruising and better fuel economy. The 12-bolt rear end is exactly what you want in a performance-built El Camino, as it's much stronger than the original 10-bolt. The sellers put some serious money into this build. We're looking at fresh paint in silver, a completely redone interior, and it's sitting on Chip Foose wheels, which aren't cheap. The odometer shows 28,000 miles, though with a build like this, that's likely since the restoration. At $25,900, you're in the right ballpark for a well-built 67 El Camino, especially considering the quality components used in the build. The 383/700 R4 combo alone represents a significant investment, not to mention the fresh paint and interior work. These 67 El Caminos are becoming increasingly desirable, combining classic muscle car styling with utility, and this one appears to be built right. It's got the power to cruise or show, and with those modern drivetrain upgrades, it should be reliable enough for regular use. 6. We're checking out a pretty interesting 1973 Chevy C30 dually that's listed for $7,500, and I've got to be completely honest with you about this one. This is definitely a project, but it's got some serious potential under the hood. Let's start with the elephant in the room. This truck needs to be towed away. The seller's upfront about that, which I appreciate. But here's where it gets interesting. Someone's put some serious work into modernizing this classic work truck with an LS swap. And we're not talking about just any basic LS swap. They've done some significant performance upgrades. The build list is pretty impressive. Texas speed cam, new high-pressure oil pump, fresh rod bearings and piston rings, new timing chain kit, upgraded trunnion rocker arms, new lifters, trays, and push rods. They've even done the LS oil barbell upgrade. That's a lot of fresh quality parts that someone's invested in. With 113,000 miles on the clock and wearing yellow paint, this C30 dually has that classic 70s heavy-duty truck presence. The 1-ton dually configuration is getting harder to find in this era, especially with a regular cab. At $7,500, you're basically buying a project with some really good bones and expensive parts already installed. But let's be real, you'll need to figure out why it's not running and factor in transport costs since it needs a tow. There's definitely some work ahead to get this beast back on the road. 7. We're looking at a 1984 Ford F-150 that's listed for $13,700. And I've got to be straight with you about this one. The seller's keeping the description pretty brief. But let's break down what we know. This F-150 is running the inline-6 engine, not a V6 as mentioned in the listing, that's a common mistake, paired with a manual transmission, which is actually a pretty reliable combination. These straight-six Fords are known for their durability and simplicity. They're basically the tortoise of truck engines. Not fast, but they'll run forever with basic maintenance. The odometer shows 74,800 miles, which is relatively low for a truck of this age, though you'll want to verify if that's original. The seller mentions it drives and runs good, and they've invested in a fresh blue paint job along with new wheels and tires, which definitely adds value. Now let's talk about that asking price. $13,700, or best offer, is pretty ambitious for an '84 F-150, even in today's market. While these trucks are gaining popularity among collectors, you typically expect to see prices like this for extremely well-preserved or fully restored examples with lots of documentation. If you're interested, you'll definitely want to inspect the undercarriage for rust. These old Fords were prone to it. Check all the mechanical components and make sure that new paint job is hiding any potential issues. The manual transmission is a plus for enthusiasts, but make sure the clutch is in good shape. 8. We're looking at a 1985 El Camino listed for $17,300, and I'm going to give you the straight scoop on this interesting build. This isn't your typical El Camino, and there's quite a bit to unpack here. Let's start with the honest parts. The seller's upfront about the clear coat issues, which is something you'll need to address if you want it looking its best. The odometer shows 178,000 miles on the body, but here's where it gets interesting. It's running a JEGS 4.3 LV6 with approximately 25,000 miles on it. They've also just installed a fresh rebuilt 350 transmission in October 2023. The seller claims they've put $12,700 into repairs, and they've documented some recent work. New AC compressor, 2022, computer, 2022, and that fresh transmission with a new torque converter. They've added some modern touches with a Kenwood Exelon stereo system, American Racing 15 inches wheels, and LED taillights. Now let me be honest about the price point. $17,300 is pretty steep for an '85 El Camino, even with all the updates. While the seller has clearly invested a lot in mechanical improvements, you're still looking at a car that needs paintwork and has high original miles on the chassis. The 4.3 LV6 is an interesting choice. It's not the most desirable engine for an El Camino, as most folks prefer the V8S. But these motors are known for being reliable workhorses when properly maintained. 9. We're checking out a really interesting find. A 1985 Ford F350 Crew Cab Dually that's listed for $26,500. And let me tell you, these old-school Crew Cab Dualies are getting harder to find, especially in this condition. What we've got here is a beast, powered by Ford's legendary 460 big block V8. That's 7.5 liters of pure torque monster, paired with an automatic transmission. These engines weren't about fuel economy, but they could pull a house off its foundation. With just 65,000 miles showing on the odometer, this truck has surprisingly low mileage for its age, and being stored inside has clearly helped preserve it. The sellers kept it pretty simple in their description, but they're highlighting some important points. The fresh bedliner is a nice touch, and indoor storage is huge for these old Fords, which were notorious for rust issues. The white paint appears to be in good shape from the description, which is impressive for a 38-year-old work truck. Now, let's talk about that $26,500 asking price. While it might seem steep at first glance, the market for clean, original Crew Cab Dualies from this era has been climbing. The Crew Cab configuration was relatively rare in '85, and finding one with the 460 low miles and in very good condition is increasingly difficult. 10. We're looking at a 1971 Chevy C10 that's caught my eye, listed at $15,000. Let me tell you what makes this classic pickup interesting, and I'll be straight with you about what we know. This C10 is running the classic 350 V8 paired with a Powerglide transmission. And let's talk about that combo for a second. The 350 is one of Chevy's most beloved engines, known for reliability and plenty of aftermarket support. The Powerglide, while only having 2 speeds, is actually a pretty robust transmission that's gained a following in the drag racing community for its simplicity and durability. The truck's showing 93,000 miles on the clock, and it's wearing what the seller notes is a purple paint job, which is definitely not a common color for these trucks. That makes it stand out from the usual red, white, or black C10S you typically see. Now, I've got to be honest, the seller's description is pretty minimal, which leaves a lot of questions unanswered. At $15,000, you'll want to know more about the truck's history, any restoration work that's been done, and the condition of crucial areas like the cab corners, floor pans, and bed. These are all common rust spots on these C10S. 11. We're looking at something pretty special. A 1985 Chevy C30 that's been with the same owner since new. And let me tell you why this one's worth talking about. First off, finding a one-owner C30 from this era is getting rare, especially one that's been garage kept its entire life. This truck is running the reliable 350 V8 paired with a 3-speed manual transmission with a granny low gear. That's a fantastic combination for a work truck, offering both durability and serious low-end grunt when you need it. The odometer shows 113,500 miles, which averages to just about 3,000 miles per year. Pretty low mileage for a C30. Being garage kept since new is a huge plus, as these trucks often lived hard lives outdoors and typically show it. The white paint likely helps hide any minor imperfections, but being stored inside has probably kept it in much better condition than most of its peers. At $12,000, you're looking at a fair price for a well-preserved, one-owner example of these workhorses. The fact that it's been garage kept and has documented history from new adds significant value. These C30S were built to work, and finding one that hasn't been worked to death is increasingly difficult. The manual transmission with the granny low gear is actually a desirable feature for collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate the original configuration. It's not as convenient as an automatic for daily use, but it's incredibly robust and gives you excellent control, especially under load. 12. We're checking out a sweet 1972 Chevy C10 that's listed for $22,500. And let me tell you why this one caught my attention. The 67, 72 C10S are some of the most sought-after classic trucks right now, and this one seems to have some nice touches. Let's talk about what we're looking at here. It's running the classic 350 cubic inch V8 paired with the 350 turbo transmission. That's a combination that's proven itself over decades as reliable and easy to maintain. The 8-foot bed model gives you plenty of utility, and it's actually less common than the short bed versions that everyone seems to want these days. One of the coolest features on this truck is the set of Corvette 15X8 rally wheels. Those are brand new, and paired with fresh BF Goodrich tires, they give this C10 a perfect stance. The seller claims it's very solid with no rust, which is huge for these trucks as they were prone to rust in the cab corners, rocker panels, and bed. Now let's talk about that $22,500 asking price. While it might seem steep to some, the market for clean 67, 72 C10S has been climbing steadily. If this truck is truly rust-free and runs as well as described, it's actually in the ballpark for today's market, especially with the desirable 350/350ths combo and those fresh wheels and tires. The blue paint looks clean in the listing, and these trucks wear that color particularly well. The long bed configuration, while maybe not as popular with the show crowd, actually makes this more practical if you're planning to use it as a truck should be used. 13. We're looking at a 1982 Chevy C30 that's listed for $2,500. And I've got to be completely honest with you. This is definitely a project truck, but it might be worth considering if you're mechanically inclined and looking for a cheap way into a classic diesel pickup. Let's address the elephant in the room first. This truck isn't running. It made it from Texas to Arizona, but eventually gave up the ghost in Colorado. The seller's being upfront about its condition, which I appreciate. It's got the 6.2L diesel engine, and interestingly, there's an extra 6.2 engine in the bed. That could be worth something to the right buyer, or useful for parts. The good news: the seller claims there's minimal rust, which makes sense given its Texas and Arizona history. The transmission was reportedly working when it was parked, though you'll want to verify that claim. There's no tailgate, so factor that into your plans and budget. At $2,500, you're basically buying a project with potential. These old 6.2 diesel C30S are getting harder to find, and while they're not powerhouses like modern diesels, They're simple mechanical engines that can be reliable when properly maintained. The rolled over odometer means you're buying based on condition, not mileage. 14. Let me tell you about this sweet 1985 Dodge D150 I found on Craigslist for $6,750. This is one of those classic American pickups that just keeps on trucking, and this particular example looks like a real gem with only 85,900 miles on the clock. It's rocking that timeless regular cab, long bed configuration in silver, which honestly suits these D150s perfectly. Under the hood, you're getting that bulletproof 5.2 LV8, that's the 318 cubic inch for you old school folks, paired with an automatic transmission sending power to the rear wheels. These engines are known for their reliability and torque. They're pretty much unkillable if maintained properly. The seller's listing this as being in excellent condition, and they're marketing it as super clean, which is pretty rare for a 38-year-old work truck. That low mileage is definitely a plus point, considering most of these were used and abused as work trucks. The clean title is another good sign. For $6,750, you're getting a piece of American truck history that's becoming increasingly hard to find in good condition. These D150s are starting to gain appreciation among collectors, and clean examples like this are getting harder to come by. Just keep in mind that like any vehicle from '85, you'll want to check for the usual suspects: rust in the typical spots, transmission health, and make sure all the electronics are working as they should. 15. Let me tell you about this 1978 Chevy C10. I just found listed for $5,000. I've got to be straight with you. This is definitely a project truck, and the seller's honest about it not currently running. But hold on, because there might be some potential here. This long bed C10 has a relatively low 78,749 miles on the clock and comes with the desirable V8 setup with a 4-barrel carb and automatic transmission. The seller mentions it has a straight body, which is actually a big deal for these old trucks, as they're often found with dents and rust everywhere. Plus, it's got factory AC, which is a nice bonus, though you'll probably need to get that working again too. Now, let's be real here. When someone says great and easy project, we all know there's no such thing as an easy project. The fact that it's not running is obviously the elephant in the room, and that could mean anything from a simple fix to a major headache. The interior is described as decent, which in classic car language usually means worn but complete. For $5,000, you're looking at a solid starting point for a classic truck build. These C10s are incredibly popular for restoration, and parts availability is excellent. The clean title is definitely a plus. But remember, you'll need to factor in getting it running, which could significantly impact your total investment. 16. Let me tell you about this beautiful 1973 Chevy Cheyenne that just popped up for $18,000. Now, the Cheyenne was basically Chevy's luxury trim level back in the day, and this one looks like a pretty solid example with some significant recent investments. What's really interesting here is that we're looking at a truck with a fresh motor. Only 3,000 miles on the new V8, which is a huge plus. The seller's also taken care of two other major concerns: new tires and a new AC system. That's a lot of expensive maintenance items already handled for the next owner. This is an 8-foot bed model, which makes it super practical if you're actually planning to use it as a truck. With 90,000 miles showing on the odometer, though that's likely original miles on the chassis, it's got reasonable mileage for a nearly 50-year-old vehicle. The blue paint gives it that classic 70s vibe, and being a Cheyenne model, it would have come with more upscale trim and interior features than the base models. At $18,000, we're in the territory where you're paying for a classic that's ready to drive rather than a project truck. The price reflects both the desirability of the Cheyenne trim and the recent mechanical investments. These early 70s Chevys have been climbing in value, especially clean examples with good maintenance history. Just remember, even with the new motor and AC, you're still dealing with a 50-year-old truck. It'll have quirks and characteristics that come with vintage vehicles, but that's part of the charm. If you're looking for a classic Chevy truck that you can actually drive and enjoy right away, this Cheyenne seems like it could be a solid choice. 17. Let me tell you about this interesting 1985 Chevy K5 Blazer M1009 I found for $6,500. This isn't your typical K5, it's actually a military spec version, M1009, with a 6.2L Detroit diesel engine, which makes this quite a unique find. Let's be totally honest here. The seller mentions rust, and these military Blazers were typically worked hard. But there's some really intriguing stuff going on with this one. The owner's done some significant upgrades, including adding a turbo to that diesel engine, which these didn't come with originally, and they've modernized the interior with 90s Tahoe seats, which is actually a pretty smart comfort upgrade. The mechanical work list is pretty extensive. New batteries, replaced U-joints, new steering stabilizer, and the tires apparently have plenty of tread left. With 73,124 miles on the clock, that's relatively low for these old workhorses. The straight pipe setup and EPA exemption means you're getting a proper old-school diesel experience, loud and proud. At $6,500, considering the current market for K5 Blazers, this could be an interesting project, especially if you're into diesel power. The 4x4 system on these is robust, and the military spec components generally mean heavy-duty everything. However, you'll want to inspect that rust situation carefully. These old military vehicles can hide some nasty surprises in the bodywork. 18. Let me tell you about this super cool 1971 Chevy Suburban I just spotted for $18,500. This is one of those rare finds, a one-owner three-door Suburban from the early 70s. If you're not familiar, these three-door models are pretty unique, with two doors on the passenger side and one on the driver's side. It's a really interesting piece of automotive history. The seller's keeping it pretty brief in their description, but there are some important points to note. The Suburban's been treated to a repaint in blue, which helps preserve these old bodies from the typical rust issues these vintage SUVs often face. They're also advertising it as being ready to drive and enjoy, which is a big deal for a 52-year-old vehicle. Now, I've got to point out that there's no mileage listed in the ad, which is something you definitely want to ask about when viewing. Also, while they mention good tires, you'll want to check the age of those tires, not just the tread depth, given the vehicle's age. At $18,500, you're in the territory where these classic Suburbans are starting to become collectible. The one-owner history is a huge plus. It suggests the vehicle has probably had consistent care throughout its life, rather than being passed around between multiple owners. This could be a great choice if you're looking for a unique classic that you can actually use. These old Suburbans have tons of space, classic good looks, and they tend to be relatively simple to work on. Just remember, the seller wants phone calls only, no texts or emails, so you'll need to do this deal old school style, which kind of fits the character of the vehicle itself. 19. Let me tell you about this awesome 1952 Ford F3 that just popped up for $6,000. This is one of those honest, no-nonsense old farm trucks with some really smart upgrades that make it more usable in today's world. What's really cool here is that the seller has done some thoughtful modifications while keeping the truck's character intact. They've swapped in a 1970 Dana 60 rear end with 3.73 gears, which is actually a brilliant upgrade. It means this old girl can now handle highway speeds at reasonable RPMs, 2850 at 65 miles per hour. The new 13-leaf spring setup is another smart upgrade, balancing durability with ride quality compared to the original 19-leaf setup. Under the hood, you've got the 215 cubic inch straight six from 53, paired with that classic non-synchronized 4-speed with a granny gear. So you'll need to know your double clutching to drive it properly. The seller's honest about the starting characteristics. It fires up fine in winter if used regularly, but needs a bit of coaxing after sitting for a couple weeks. They've taken care of some crucial maintenance items like the kingpins last year, and it's still running its original 6-volt electrical system. The working heater is actually a big plus for a truck this age. At $6,000, you're getting a piece of American farming history that's been thoughtfully updated for modern use without losing its vintage charm. These F3s are getting harder to find, especially ones that have been maintained and upgraded like this. It's not a show truck. It's better than that. It's a genuine working classic that's been kept useful and drivable. 20. Let me tell you about this interesting 1983 Dodge Ram 2500 project that's up for $7,500. This isn't your typical 83 Ram. It's got some serious upgrades that make it worth a closer look. The biggest deal here is that someone's done a 5.9 Cummins diesel swap from a 91 one-ton truck, which is actually a pretty sweet upgrade from the original engine. Let's be totally honest here. This is definitely a project truck. It's been sitting for many years and isn't currently registered. The seller's upfront about the odometer being broken and the mileage being unknown. They just put $175,000 to post the ad. However, there are some really good points. They claim there's no rust and the body is very straight, which is huge for a truck of this age. It's even got working power windows, which is kind of miraculous for an E83. The drivetrain setup is interesting. They've basically transplanted the whole running gear, engine, trans, and axles, from a 91 one-ton truck. The 5.9 Cummins is legendary for its reliability, and the seller says it sounds good, strong. It's sitting on what appears to be a 4-inch lift kit, and it's rocking that classic short bed /4x4 configuration that people love. At $7,500, you're paying for the Cummins swap and the rust-free body more than anything else. The truck needs paint, and after sitting for years, you'll probably want to go through all the usual revival basics: fluids, seals, hoses, etc.